Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Deeper Questions for this fall semester 2012. Just so everyone knows, this is being audio recorded for use on YouTube later. So I wanted to start by thanking our sponsors, Occam's Razors. Many of you are kind of members or affiliated in some way, so thanks for the sponsorship on that, and thanks for everyone for coming. And if anyone's listening online, thank you for listening to this later on after the fact. So this semester, we're focused on the Gospel of Mark. I guess everyone kind of has one of the handouts at their seat. And tonight we'll be covering specifically how does the Gospel seek class status. In the, what do you call those, the workbooks? So in the workbooks, it's more broadly titled Socioeconomic Issues. We kind of started it in reverse. Instead of starting with a question, we started with some topics, and that was the topic that we had, and out of it came this idea of how does the gospel see class status. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. To start, I think it's important to give kind of a brief history of Palestine, so there's a bit of context for what life was like in the first century. In that area for everyone who lived during the writing of this. So Palestine, situated as kind of a crossroads between three continents, obviously linking Asia, Africa, and Europe, and that meant that in that time and even still today, that it's sort of a center point for cultural and religious influence at the time from Egypt and Syria and Mesopotamia, but now, obviously it's a little different, but it's still a strategic center point on that. So there were about 800 years of foreign rule leading up to the Hellenization of the area, and that came about whenever the Romans conquered the last of the Hasmonean kingdom at around 37 BC. So this is kind of a list of some key historical events that happened. You see Israel falls to Assyria, and then Judah falls to the Babylonians, ending the Old Testament era. And Alexander conquers Palestine, and then Antiochus IV outlawed Judaism and dedicated the temple to Zeus, which led to the Maccabean revolt. And then you had the Romans annexing the Hasmonean kingdom, and then Herod appointed as the king of Judea, and then about 37, he defeated the last successor of the Hasmonean throne, and that solidified Roman rule and sort of brought about the broader Hellenization of the region. So the social makeup of the area at the time, about 1% to 2% were at the top, so we're the 1%. That was political, military, and religious leaders, and then those that kind of made up the rest of the aristocracy, very wealthy. 5 to 7 were the bureaucracy to control the society. That was the tax collectors, the police, the scribes, etc. Then you had 15% who were sort of a middle class that lived above day-to-day living, and they were typically priests and fortunate merchants and traders, those who had done a little better for themselves or had better lands and fertile areas. Artisans, craftsmen, and bankers, and the like. So below that, you had the 70% of the working poor. Those were struggling farmers and fishermen. People who were laborers of other farmers, or those who kind of just kept their head above water. By modern standards, that 70% would be living in poverty. So that's kind of important in showing how the gospel appeals to the sort of on the margins of 15%, but really heavily towards the 70%. And then below that, you have 10% of the what some call the untouchables, the outcasts, the beggars, the criminals, the prostitutes, anybody who just was on the fringes of society. Communication at the time. Obviously, it's hard to pin down a specific number, but some studies have shown that perhaps as low as 3% literacy rate among the entire populace. Many of the 70% who lived as the working poor were had 0% literacy rate, and you had the upper echelons had a little higher, between 1% to 2%, and then you had some outliers of people who were literate. Oral traditions and storytelling were very important means of communication at this time. Those who could read would sometimes read out loud in the town squares, those things that were important, or stories, or things that needed to be heard. And parables were often a way of teaching those important lessons, using crop imagery and things that related to fishermen and farming, that agrarian society as it was. And so the writings of the time, as they were being told back, were often made to appeal to those who were kind of disenfranchised and less fortunate. And so one of the most popular styles of writing during that time to appeal to them was apocalyptic writing. In that style, there are four major tenets, which is a duality, an obvious good versus evil type scenario. Pessimism, where evil dominates now, can't improve society, it's not really worth trying. And then there is that God will intervene, often through resurrection, to bring about good and supplant evil, that sort of thing. And then God's judgment is imminent at all times. There's no escape from God's judgment. And so the apocalyptic writings sort of paint this vision of heaven as a blueprint for how things will go on earth. And often the oppressed who it appeals to are the insiders who know things that others don't. They have sort of inside knowledge of whatever the writer is speaking of. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So this leads us to the socially marginalized, the sick, poor, and destitute, who are kind of on the fringes. These are the ones who seem to have been sought out by the writers of this time, especially the gospel. And the author seems to show Jesus appealing to these particular people who made up the largest portion of the population. So in Mark 2:15 through 17, it's sort of a call to the sinners, and Jesus said, "Those who are well have no need of physician, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." So that's sort of a direct shot of, those who don't need what I'm bringing, but the sinners do. And then there was of course the four of the disciples, and one of the verses are fishermen, so that lumps them in sort of with that broader population. And then you have his his speaking to the "Who are my mothers and brothers?" In 3:33 through 35. And in part of the passage he says, "Who are my mothers and brothers? Here are my mothers and brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my mother, my brother, and sister." So that's sort of inviting everybody into the fold, and anybody is part of this that he's about to preach to. I don't want to spend a lot of time on miracles. We'll go deeper. Ever, are you going to go deeper into the demons with miracles? Is it a little bit more to it there?
There'll be some of that.
Okay. So I've kind of highlighted in blue some of the references to miracles that show a connection to a specific social issue. The cleansing of the leper, which lepers were often, a part of the fringe of societies, and it showed, Jesus' compassion and power to heal even those who are socially outcast. And there's the calming of the storm, feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. Those two, feeding the masses, those who actually needed food. So that's mostly what I want to cover on miracles, because I don't want to get too buried deep inside the miracles. I just wanted to show what the writer referenced to the specific social issues. So now we get to the insiders, which Everett kind of claimed as the paranormal elite with whose access to God's kingdom is unavailable to others. I don't view them that way. I view both the disciples and the readers as having inside knowledge. Both then and now, the readers seem to have. There's sort of this idea of the good news being delivered to everybody, and that anybody who reads it now has that knowledge and either should share that or because it's it's imminent and everything, but they now have the inside knowledge. Specific examples are the light under the basket. He said to them, "Pay attention to what you hear. With measure you will use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. For the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." Which just basically says, you're going to, any of you need to pay attention. All of you need to pay attention. Whether you have or have not, everybody needs to pay attention to what's going on here. No one knows the day or the hour. The whole stay awake. Nobody knows the day or the hour. Not anybody. It's kind of the point of putting that in there. And then the purpose of parables. Specifically in 4:10 through 20, part of that passage says, "As he said to them, to you that has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside everything is in parables, so that they may indeed see but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. And he said to them, do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word." And that was kind of a direct reference to his disciples, saying, these parables are the way that you're going to be able to spread the good word. This is an example of a parable, and we're referencing it. So pay attention to this, because if you can't understand this, how can you actually sow the good word? Moving on, we have several references to Jesus' rebellion against the status quo at the time. And if anyone wants to stop me anytime, I know I'm moving kind of fast through this. I prefer to kind of jog through it and then get to the question and answer portion of it. So Jesus' rebellion towards the wealth and traditions of the time. We have the parable of the rich young man, where he says, and I'm sorry I don't have these up on screen, but I meant to print out verses and I didn't do that. Kind of tough to chew through without actually having it. So I have them. Yeah, I know the specific part I was going to do, though. Is this part of it, or is it just yours? Okay. Yeah, I have it, yeah. So, the parable of the rich young man, basically, I can't get it up there. He comes across a man, and he says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone, and you know the commandments, etc., etc." And then he says, "Teacher, I've kept all these from my youth." And Jesus said, "You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." And the young man went away disheartened and sorrowful because he had so many great possessions. That's one of those stories told directly to a rich young man at the time, saying essentially, abandon all of your worldly possessions and come with me, which is kind of a shot at wealth. One of those things where he says, this is you kind of have to lead a poor life in order to understand what I'm doing. At least that's how I interpret it. But paying taxes to Caesar, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's, and that sort of speaks to everything, everything being God's. Let's see here. The tradition of not working on the Sabbath is what's referenced there in 2:23 through 27. The passage says, the Pharisees had kind of said to him, look what you're doing, it's not lawful on the Sabbath. And he said, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, and those who were with him? And how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was not made for man. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath. And this was showing that, this was one of Jesus' assertions of authority, as well as a rebellious attitude toward the traditions of the time. And the parable specifically is saying, I'm the Lord even of the Sabbath, and that your traditions don't mean anything to me. Let's move on to his rebellion against authority. So when Jesus cleanses the temple, he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. He overturned the tables and the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them, saying, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? And the chief priests and the scribes heard it when they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teachings. And when evening came, they went out of the city. So the reason for bringing this up is that he's rebelling directly against the authority, going through the temple, ripping up the tables and saying, this is a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of robbers. So that's again a shot towards those who of the wealthy class who had sort of ownership of the temple, were using it for their own personal gain, and his rebellion against that. There's the claim of him being a false prophet. A lot of this I'm kind of briefly touching on, because I'll get to it in the next talk that I'll do, which is about Jesus and where he derives his authority. But I wanted to touch on it just briefly. Let's see what this is. Let's just get past that. So, I think overall the writer portrays Jesus as a calming and hopeful presence for those who are in despair and those who are oppressed. He identifies deeply with human suffering, to the point at which he's willing to sacrifice himself in a service to end the lot of those people suffering. And so this is illustrated in Mark 15:34. The writer says Jesus referenced Psalm 22, which I think was sort of him harkening back and say even in his dying moment he references something from the old book, which would appeal to many of those who may not have believed. He says, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" It's not really important, I don't think, whether it did or did not happen for this discussion, but the picture is painted of Jesus being that sort of light for those who were disenfranchised. So, I think that in the study of this particular topic, you can see that the lower class is the kind of the target of, I suppose both classes are, but it's written as a hopeful call to the lower class and a sort of condemnation to the upper classes to say your time is coming. And so I think that's most of it. I would really like to get to you guys' questions, so I'll just end it there.
one thing that's always I found interesting about the notion that Jesus was speaking to the poor and the downtrodden and so forth is that the big elephant in the room here regarding the Gospel of Mark and the other Gospels is that there was a slave class that he doesn't address. And it seems like most of the people that he interacts with and talks with and so forth are other Jews, and they are the downtrodden class because this is an occupied territory. So one could also interpret that, not just that he was identifying with the downtrodden class, but that he was identifying with those of his fellow Jews, his own ethnic group, who just happened to be downtrodden at that point. Right? So if he was really going to do outreach to those who were the most outcast, why didn't he ever say at any point, no slavery? Slavery is bad. One day we'll get rid of this.
Right. And I think some of that comes down to the writer, the direction the writer wanted to take, who he was trying to appeal to. This was sort of the fulfillment of the prophecy in the Old Testament. I mean, I don't know specifically. If anybody has any opinion on that.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say that if let me start over. The author kept it nebulous, I think. It wasn't too specific because it was to get the poor and downtrodden later on. If we're talking about the events when they happened, it most likely, as Dr. Kruger said, was the Jews who were the lower class. So then he was appealing to them. But we're reading it now, and it's going to appeal to, in general, those who are lower class, regardless of ethnic status.
Yep.
And I was just going to say that if the author chose, supposing Jesus was real and he actually did come out against slavery, and the author decided not to put that in his book, then I just think
He missed a big chance.
he could have done that a lot of times throughout the text, as well as just. And so I'm saying, if there's a possibility of the author to do it in this case, why wouldn't he do it with the whole text? So.
And also, had the author put this in it, put the slavery condemnation in this part, I think it would actually be a big help to skeptics like myself. Like, oh, you actually had a good moral lesson there? That's awesome. So you just said something that slavery was bad? That's good. I can appreciate that. But since it wasn't there, I'm left to wonder.
Yeah. I mean, the other question is, even if it were there, would it really sway your skepticism very much?
Good call.
There's probably a whole host of other things that.
Well, honestly, no, it probably wouldn't sway my skepticism, but the lack of it being there definitely does cause me to be skeptical.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one might even go further and say that if this, slaves were all over the area, in Jesus' time, and if that was omitted from the text, either by some, unknown author or some later unknown editor or whoever, or Jesus really didn't say anything about it, then we might ask ourselves, well, it looks like then somebody colored this text so that the morals will better reflect that of the times or the audience, which means that it's going to look a lot more like a situational ethics kind of thing than any claim to be, absolute or, something like that, objective ethics.
This is purely a story. Like it's one of the things that seems obvious when you look at it from this sort of perspective, but when you take out all the specifics, it becomes applicable to most viewpoints. That's why it's kept so nebulous, as I said before.
Right on. I did want to see how people thought about the gospel and class status today, as it was written and it's still read and interpreted today. I think there's a lot of controversy around the people who are in the upper middle class and read about it and have that sort of sense that it appeals directly to them, and without contrast to who it was specifically written for at the time. I just wondered if there were any opinions on that from either side.
Seems like there's been a hijacking, if you like the basically the modern Republican environment. Often they take different cues from biblical analogies, use them to support their own ends. This is dishonest for the specific reason that Jesus goes directly against the gaudiness and the material possessions and all this stuff. Some people who usually use this are not lacking. So,
Do you think the message is still applicable even with the omission of the slave?
I do think
slave stuff.
the message is readily available even without the specificity of the slaves. But the fact that people are trying to hijack it for their own political means, that sort of makes it a questionable right.
Well, and the fact that it's so vague that any person of any political affiliation can cite different passages to back them up, and I think it just points to the inauthenticity
count.
of the text as a whole.
It doesn't count as a point in the text when you can use it to bolster any sort of viewpoint you want.
Can I say though, can't that be taken in any type of literature? If you take any paragraph out of any type of literature and put it in the wrong context, it basically eliminates any validity from the source. You have
Well,
to
and
take
that's
it as a
why-
whole.
That's why I see the Bible as a piece of literature as opposed to a history book.
There is some history in it, but there's also a lot of stories.
Yeah, I mean, as he said, parables were a huge part of, trying to teach morality. And there's also the fact that a lot of the parables have to do with, fishing and farming, and that just is not done today. So it's like trying to, well, the way I think about it is that it's a book, a piece of literature that's 2,000 years out of context. And that's my, I don't know, that's sort of my big problem with the book overall. But as far as the passages that we're talking about right now, I think it is clear that
I think there was a
in these
little bit of
passages,
intelligent
Jesus,
design going on.
that in these passages, Jesus, is more trying to relate to the lower class, and I don't see how that applies as much today.
Oh, and just very, very quickly, I noted several times that this setup seems like the perfect way to get people to follow your religion. I'm just going to leave it at that.
From the writing style and all the appeals. Is it okay if I just move this in the center?
I'm trying to get this topic. I've been sort of mulling this over for a long time. What is the author saying overall about class status? I think there's certainly a fair amount said, and I think some people do want to read this as a sort of liberation of the lower classes sort of mentality, but and there's certainly a couple parts that run in that direction. I mean, there's the widow's donation when she gives this small amount that she has, and there's sort of an elevation and respect for the poor in that scene, and when he tells the rich man to give away all he has. But I think one significant sentence, and that has a lot of, I think there's a lot in it, is the anointing of Jesus' feet scene, where this lady comes to him and takes this ointment that is, in the narrative, is worth about a year's wages, and sort of dumps it on him, and there's this objection in his presence as of, well, that was a waste, you can just give that to the poor. And so it comes across in text as a gratuitous act. And then Jesus' response is, probably one of the more famous lines that the author of the authors is, "The poor will always be with you." And there's this, and so there's now, I think always for some of the apocalyptic issues that we'll be dealing with later. I'm not entirely sure how long he thought always was gonna be, but there is this there. At least at that point, the author is acknowledging a permanency of the poor. So it's not, at very least, I don't think you can see it as a liberation of the poor, but it's also hard to say at that point whether he's acknowledging a factual reality. And in that sense, it's a very insightful comment, since the poor have always been with us ever since. But or is that a normative statement? And there's something he's saying. That's the way it is, and that's okay. And I'd be interested in what other people have to say. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, wouldn't that be a pretty safe bet that you're gonna have the poor with you somewhere? I mean, until we get to like Star Trek situation or something, or get re-energy or something. But I mean, we just always have these class divides. It's a real simple prophecy to make.
Well, I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying it's.
Insightful.
It's. I think it's if you read it more in a utopian type of sense of the liberation of the poor, then he's at least rooting it back down into some sort of reality. But it's not. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know.
Well, it's not a simple prophecy, though. He says you'll always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me. Like, it's not simply just this general prediction. Like, he's making more of a statement than just how long the poor will be around. Like, the point is that what she's doing right now is more important than giving that money to the poor, because you won't always have me. You'll always have them. And so while you still have me, worship of me is important.
I was just going to say that in the context of this apocalyptic writing, it just seems like almost like a comforting of to the poor, like directed towards the poor. Like you can't improve society, so look, just don't worry that you're poor. Worship me, and then you'll be rich in heaven. I don't see how that's. I don't see how that's good in any way. How it progresses society in any way.
Well, I come at this from a little different perspective, but I look at Jesus' message about class differently. I look at him when he's speaking to the poor. What he's telling the poor is that your poorness and your status in society won't keep you from me and my kingdom. And on the several occasions that we have where he's speaking to the rich among them, he's saying that your richness won't gain you access to me either. In that he's setting up a third idea. He's setting up this idea that the idea of class of rich or poor doesn't have a place in his kingdom. And the idea that his kingdom is not about you're too poor to enter in or you're rich enough to enter in. He's setting up the idea that your poorness won't keep you and your richness won't allow you in.
Okay. But it's still a way to say, don't worry about it right now. I mean, right?
It can have the dual meaning.
He fed them.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean,
So he acknowledged their
I think-
poorness. He acknowledged their plight at the time.
And he didn't just say, I'll let you die sooner so that you can be.
Right,
It
but,
was, yeah.
But shouldn't, I mean, do you think that he's telling his followers that they should follow his example and feed their poor of their time as well, or?
Absolutely.
Okay, no, I mean, I'm for that. I just don't see how that necessarily comes across with the apocalyptic viewpoint.
Well, personally, I think the application of the apocalyptic thing is a little muddies the water a little bit.
Yeah,
I think in this discussion, I think it's kind of what we're doing here. But I think too that you have the physical and the spiritual level here too. I mean, the liberation that Jesus accomplished on the cross was a spiritual liberation that points to a physical liberation as well, and that because of the way that Jesus has liberated then can show physically through the liberation of feeding the poor and through doing those things, show forth what he has done for us and give that message to them as well.
Well, if every Christian thought like that, I probably wouldn't be an atheist.
Well, if every Christian thought the way they should, we probably would be any.
Or if there was evidence.
Well,
Yeah, that helps.
Holcomb's Razors is feeding us today, though.
well, I wanted to say one more thing before we might be topic about that example and that story, and that is that's justified so many people with means to not help the poor, because one of the more obvious ways for me at least, to interpret the notion that the poor will always be with us is you can't do anything about it. I mean, they're always going to be with us. Then don't think that you can eradicate poverty. And if you can't eradicate poverty, then, it looks like when you're helping the poor, it's not so that you can eradicate poverty, it's what, maybe helpful gestures or
Frivolity.
just to make yourself feel better, or, but he's saying, don't think you can get rid of poverty.
I think to Trey's point, I think, had he not said the second thing, I think that would be an able way to interpret that.
What, that there's going to be poor people after I'm dead?
And you'll always have the poor, but you won't always have me.
Okay, well, I can say
That part is kind of integral to what he's saying. I mean, just the one text of you'll always have the poor out of context is not.
But
That
what
does
is
lend
the
itself
significance
to
of that second part?
It wasn't a waste, because you won't always have me.
Well, everybody can say that. There's going to be poor people after I'm dead.
Right.
Yeah, but
so
rarely
what?
can you say that in the midst of someone worshiping at your feet, like this woman was. So in the context of worship, when he says
Well, hang on,
that,
was
does
she
mean
worshiping him?
yeah, she was anointing his feet with this,
Because I remember the time when somebody tried to worship him, he said not to do it, to worship God
That's not
in heaven. Yeah.
Which story, or where is
Yeah,
that?
that's what's the one where the woman tries to worship him and specifically says,
Oh, that's after resurrection that Mary comes up and then he says, it's not yet my time, or some kind of deal.
One could argue that was after the resurrection, so he was in God's form.
It still wasn't time to worship him.
I don't agree with the viewpoint, but I'm
You
just
gotta
saying.
do it, you gotta worship him.
And specifically, I don't know that that's in.
Well, but in any case, the notion that,
Right.
for someone to say, take care of me now before I'm gone, because there's always going to be poor people, but you won't always have a chance to, let me say, pamper me.
And I think
that's how a lot of rich people look at this passage. It's like, hey, Jesus said you should enjoy your wealth.
And I think that's a pessimistic and wrong interpretation of that. I believe it should at least serve as a reminder that they will always be there. That you should always take care of them, and anyone who is rich, should potentially. I don't think this is just my interpretation. Is if you are wealthy, look back to those passages where I said that all that wealth won't get you anywhere, and know that you should take care of the poor because they're always going to be with you, whatever the case is. And yeah, in a utopian society, you would probably eliminate the poor, and that would no longer be that. But then we'd be closer to what he would call heaven on earth if we eliminated poverty, which is supposed to be sort of the goal of a lot of this stuff that's written about.
With the benefit of the doubt of him being God and everything, why is it really necessary for him to spend his time on earth being worshipped? If he's in God form, or has been in God form, and is normally being worshipped, why would he use his time on earth to just be like, no, don't worry about that, worship me while I'm here? Why is that important at all? Like, shouldn't he invest all of his time into helping people and not,
He's leaving that to others, it seems.
And I think a lot of that will come with is it the next session? It's not the next one, it's the next one. Right? January, it's the January session.
Yeah.
The January session, we're going to go into why, or how Jesus derives his authority. And I think those sorts of passages they show how he asserts his authority as, that figure that is here in place of God. And so those are important for other reasons, not just for that. It's a way of him showing that I am who I say I am. And you need to recognize that.
Person that was worshipped.
Don't be silly. If you're an omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent being coming to humans, you're not going to teach them about germ theory or electricity. You're going to let them kiss your feet and pour perfume on you. That's what you do because you love them so much.
Nothing that helps immediately, just ambiguous moral lessons.
the purpose more in that particular passage was not for him saying, you know, I think it was more of a defense in her behalf, saying, you know, why are you criticizing her for, you know, for doing what she's done? Here, she recognizes who I am, and she's performing this act. And I think that it wasn't so much of a derogatory, you know, gotta have the poor all the time, you know.
Yeah.
While I'm here, let's just, you know, worship me. I think it was more of a defensive for her, and stepping up and letting them know she recognizes who I am.
I think that's one example of this situational morality that is ever present in this holy text, this thing that's supposed to show you an objective, like this is good and this is bad. It just doesn't do that. Even Jesus
I've
had
heard about 5 different interpretations of this, and they're all equally valid depending on perspective.
Right.
But if you say that this book, once, as he said, is an objective moral code, and then you read passages like this and get different interpretations for one event, then I honestly think you'd be dishonest.
intellectually, not
Oh, and there's nothing in the story about worship in this at all. It's just, he was in Bethany, the house of Simon, he sat at a table. A woman came with a alabaster flask of anointment, very costly. She broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said indignantly, why was it anointment wasted? But there's nothing about the worship.
I think that was Trey's sort of interpretation, was that, you know, worship be while I'm here. But yeah, there is nothing, explicitly.
Because I don't know, worship.
Yeah,
Putting up with that.
Yeah, I don't know that he
He didn't even want people to
explicitly
call
ever
him
said
good.
worship.
Yeah, Phil called him good one time, good master, and he reprimanded him, saying, no one good but God.
Well, that would even make it more difficult to sort of get some good message out of the passage. If Jesus isn't being worshipped, it's that somebody is pampering him, and he said, look, we're always going to have the poor. You got to take care of them out here.
Well, if we're gonna be fair, it doesn't say he's being pampered either. Like, that word's not in the text.
It's just
It's not in the text, it's shown in the text.
oil, so
It's expensive oil, and somebody is asking, hey, how come you're using this oil?
But I mean, you could paint the picture any different ways. I mean, he could be filthy and have rags on, and she does this
If
one
somebody
thing with,
gave me
it just doesn't
$1,000
real know.
meal, I would say I would give him that. I wouldn't even bet not.
Well,
And if somebody said that's BS, how dare you get that? You would probably be like, look, this person is a very nice person for giving me this $1,000 meal. Don't
Right.
knock him for that. They're being
Yeah.
kind. I don't know why this meal costs $1,000, but come on.
I don't really need it either.
Right.
That's the same thing that
I think it was already done at that point too.
Right.
By the time he met
Yeah,
it.
that's true.
Had he said it beforehand, Jesus probably would have been like, you know what, you're right, we shouldn't do this.
Right.
But
And if
since
nothing
it's
else,
happened-
it's a show of kindness of, you know, because if he had come off, if you had, I mean, you could have not told the story, but if he had come off and said, you're right, that was a total waste, why did you do that, woman? That's just not very Jesus-like,
That's
right?
a little bit meaner.
Right.
So rather than use it as a teachable moment,
I think he did use it as a teachable moment, which was, you know, it wasn't a waste. There will always be poor. You already bought the oil or the ointment or whatever. You did not waste it on me. And I don't know. There are a bunch of different interpretations of it. I think that we can't really know the intent of what he was saying or how he was saying it or why he was saying it or the context of actually what was happening in that moment.
well, it says you won't pay him dump your stuff. But, I mean, given that he also tells other people, hey, you need to sell everything and give your money to the poor before you can follow me. How does that square with, I mean, it seems like it just muddies his message. Maybe it's more of a situational thing, but, you know, how can he get this message clearly?
Well, I think if he were just a person, I think that might be a valid argument, but he was not just a person. He was God incarnate and therefore worthy of worship.
What evidence do you have for that claim?
The text makes the claim, and we're going on the text. So
yeah.
I'm just saying here that he makes the claim in the text. He makes the claim that he is God incarnate.
Well, if you believe that, yes.
Where does it say that incarnate? Anything like that?
In the book of John,
Yeah, it doesn't say that in Mark.
Let's call himself the Son of Man, which is
Well,
a reference to Daniel.
A lot of people are referred to.
I think that when looking at any part of the four Gospels, or any part of the Bible, for that matter, we have to take into consideration that, as John pointed out before, these were a lot of oral traditions.
Yes.
So when the writer wrote, and it was clearly a long time after the death of Jesus, when the writer wrote the passage, he was just going by memory. If he was included in the disciples, if he was a disciple, and, I don't recall Mark being one of the 12 who was with Jesus on walking on earth, but if he was, he could have probably had a better memory on that. But a lot of this is just oral traditions given down and passed down. And so to defend not the writer, but to defend Jesus himself, the writer might not have gotten it all right.
Right. But
And
then-
so therefore, what was, and also we have to take into consideration that all of the things that were put in the Bible were with a group of people just like this who decided what went in and what didn't go in,
Don't you
what
feel like
writings
that
went.
takes away from the point of the holy text? I mean, if it is not infallible, then why should we be basing our whole worldview on what is essentially a piece of fiction?
And that's sort of what we went into the last topic.
Right.
Is it inspired or not? And apologies to those who missed that. We didn't really, there was no solid ground. It was sort of one or the other.
Right.
You take it as an act of faith to believe that way, or you're skeptical about it.
Right.
Either
Well,
way.
and I was going to say that if it can be assumed that Mark might not have gotten this all right, then why are we arguing semantics and these little
Absolutely.
specifics when we should really be talking about the overarching point? But then it goes to where I said earlier, it's hard to decipher an overarching point in the Bible because of these passages like this. They can be interpreted in many different
Once
ways.
again, we have nebulous topics, nebulous conclusions reached by each character, and once again, everybody in this room is thinking a different thought about this particular sentence.
Right. So let's just go ahead and switch gears to a different sort of nebulous topic.
Okay.
and sort of maybe see if there's something to gain from one of those other ones. I know Everett, like I said, that the idea of the insiders, those with inside knowledge, those who read it and were part of that, is sort of paranormal comment. I'll let him speak more to the side of that.
I didn't realize my paranormal lead comment was going to cause so much
It's a really good
controversy.
comment. It's like I read this whole thing, it's a really good comment in context.
Thank you. I wanted to focus, then one of the things I didn't get a chance to focus on, one of the many things I didn't get a chance to focus on, the whole limited space I had, was the 7, 1 through 13. Just take a minute to kind of introduce it. It shouldn't take long. So this is, I see the text, and this is more in response to the portion of what John was talking about this insider-outsider dualism that plays some sort of role in the text. I would say a pretty strong role, and I think it comes out really strongly here in 7, 1 through 13, where there's certainly parts in the text where I think that the rhetoric really soars, and you have the scene where John, where Jesus kind of gets mad at James and John for elevating themselves and says that the greatest is the servant of all, and other similar type passage. I think there's a largeness to that rhetoric that I think touches the hearts of I think anyone that reads it. But there's also the author kind of goes out there, but then also comes back in, and I feel it becomes really small sometimes. I think that this is really a center of it, where it's not the largeness, we're really at the heart of the us-them dynamic. And he starts off, it's essentially, as sort of as a rule of thumb, I'd say whenever he's talking about the Pharisees, he is, the author is, it seems to me, at his smallest when he's talking about the Pharisees. And just as I wouldn't certainly call myself an expert on the Pharisees, but they were a branch of Judaism that straddled both prior to this time and afterwards, and evolved what they were evolved during those decades and centuries. But they were just we could maybe loosely call them kind of a combination of a political party and a denomination of Judaism, sort of roughly. And they were fine. They were a group of people that had beliefs. We wouldn't even know about them today were it not for the fact that this author just had this. It borders to me on just an obsession with his anger toward them. And he starts off with this part, and he makes this comment for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, properly holding to the tradition of the elders, and when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and so forth. And there's this sense of a countryside full of people that just wash their hands, which is it's such a cliche, it's such a stereotype. There was never. This was the countryside. Kids don't wash their hands today. They weren't going to wash their hands. They weren't going to wash their hands back then. He's just throwing this kind of, and it is a race, and he's focusing on a race. There's sort of this racial stereotype that starts off, and it's unfortunately a racial stereotype that has been with us ever since. And then it's a racial stereotype that and then it's been used by Protestants against Roman Catholics and other people against other people and so forth. But anyways, it gets down into this, just throws in this kind of these people. All they care about washing their hands and ceremonial cleanliness. And then it gets into this section where he talks about this phenomenon that's referred to in the text as korban, which I take to be generally, at least what the accusation is that he's accusing the Pharisees of promoting a practice where if you are an adult you're encouraged to donate your wealth to some sort of religious cause prior to taking steps to secure the welfare of your own elderly parents. And so he's saying, and so the accusation is basically that the Pharisees are leaving these people. They're talking them into bequeathing the family. I'm sorry, my phone is blowing up on me. Is bequeathing away the family inheritance and then leaving their parents destitute. And what does that sound like? It sounds, if you throw in the American flag and the word Medicare, you have a TV spot that's running right now. And I think it's pretty clear that today you can score cheap political points by claiming that your rival is taking food out of grandma's mouth. And that earned you points today, and that earned you points back then. And it really, I feel like going back from the greatest is the servant of all that loftiness, it just goes all the way down to the equivalent of a Medicare commercial. And
it goes all the way from let's be all inclusive and love everyone to we don't like those people across the street. Yeah, accept this group of people. That's
sorry that I rambled a bit on that one. But I think it shows as he sets up in these various other passages that the insiders and the outsiders, and he lays that out more explicitly in other passages. But that's a sense of what, when we're talking about insiders and outsiders, that's what he's getting into, and it's kind of.
And what is the passage again?
7:1 through 13. And the Korban portion is kind of 9 through 13.
Do you mind doing that?
Oh, sure. And he said to them, this is after there's the whole introduction about they wash their hands and all this stuff. And he, meaning Jesus, said to them, meaning the Pharisees and the scribes, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles your father and your father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, whatever you have gained from me is korban, that is, given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And many such things he did. So it's, again, I just whenever I read that, I can just see the TV script of the commercial of that coming right under my mind.
Good commercial. But anyway, I didn't want to preempt, maybe you're going to have a discussion with the same chapter, verse 24, or did you going to talk about the Syrophoenician woman?
I wasn't, but...
Oh, well, I think that's an even better us versus them kind of thing. Because this one is where Jesus is walking around, some woman comes up, and it says she has a daughter who had an unclean spirit in her. And the woman comes up and asks Jesus to heal the daughter. But Jesus says something extraordinarily racist, at least to me, and it says, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs, right? And so it's like, I'm going to, do the children of Moses, the children of Israel and all that first. I'm not going to throw anything to the dogs first, right? And then she says, but even the dogs under the table feed on children's crumbs. And Jesus says, oh, because of that, zinger answer, right? Because of that answer, go ahead, she's healed. So he wasn't going to heal this woman's daughter because she wasn't one of the children. She wasn't one of the children of Israel. So that sounds bad, right? I mean, to me, that it's like that's just.
What's the address?
That's chapter 7, verse 24.
So did he heal her after she said that?
After she said, and in fact, he says, because of that answer,
Same.
now it's done.
So pretty much to say, okay, you got me. There you go.
Yeah.
I'll heal you.
Yeah.
I can't answer to that.
So he was like, but
He compared the woman to a dog begging for scraps because she was of the wrong tribe.
Yeah.
Christians,
It's not a big
Well, that's,
oh, you got me.
Somebody help me with that.
so I was going to say that's another example of him appealing to his own people, the Jewish people who were downtrodden, not necessarily the downtrodden in general.
Yeah, well, like I suppose it may be a future meeting where you all will get to it about the messianic secret and so on, but I mean, Jesus makes it clear in a number of places that he's not here for everybody. He even tells the apostles not to go preach to the Gentiles, and so on, but then again, this is one of the places where, hey, I'm not here for you. I'm here for somebody else.
To be fair, that's pretty consistent with the rest of the Bible. Like in the Old Testament, they'll have laws against killing and then go kill all of these people.
Yeah.
The laws, you're only morally obligated to help other Jews.
And also, you can't rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly by having them be permanent slaves. But the foreign people you enslave, those can be permanent and those are inherited.
I think in this, did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say, this reflects very, very well the ideas of the time, the basic ethnocentrism of the Jewish people. If he was a Jewish prophet and was only out to satisfy the Jewish people, then he's doing an excellent job.
And I guess I don't read it that way. I see it as sort of a teachable moment where,
Once again,
she's
you
saying,
can't teach it either way.
right. But I mean, I guess I just question the benefit of looking at it very cynically.
Well, how do you look, where's the
Yeah,
happy
how
face
do you
you
not
put
look at
on?
that cynically? I want an actual explanation.
Why would
Well, because I mean, if you read it as it is, right? I mean, he says something directly, which
Yes.
seems to be he's trying to get a specific. He's testing her faith, which is a theme throughout all of the books. He's testing her faith and saying, "Let them, let the dogs be fed first." He says, "Yes, Lord." She says, "Yes, Lord." Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he basically said,
So since she
right.
accepts that she's not as valuable as a Jewish person, then she gets to have her daughter healed.
My question is, why is Jesus playing tricks on people? That seems sort of backwards.
The Lord acts in mysterious
Well,
ways.
I'm wondering how you see that as a test, because he says, I'm not, she says, do me a favor and, give me a miracle or heal my daughter or whatever she said. And he says, I'm here for the children have to be fed first. I'm not going to throw stuff to the dog. So it's like, you're a dog. I'm not here for you. That's what he said. Okay.
That's a very counterintuitive way of seeing a universal prophet saying that, oh, I'm only here for certain people.
That, and also that seems like, it seems like the point you're using was made in order to reinforce someone's faith. That seems like something that someone would tell me in order to
I
interpret.
mean,
that.
he's going into a house. And he doesn't want anyone to know that he's there. And so he's saying it's not a direct sort of like you're all dogs and let them eat first. He's basically saying, let the children be fed first before I start working my miracles. Okay, you came directly to me because you recognized who I was. Threw yourself at my feet. Let us feed the children first, okay? Because we don't want to do that. And then she says something that makes him understand she believes in me or whatever the case is. I don't know what was going through his head at the time, but it was sort of it wasn't a metaphorical shot at the class of people that it was. It was basically we're here to dine and we want that to happen first before doing these
Well,
miracles.
she's asking for a miracle to begin with. Like, that's why she even approached him.
Right.
She already has the faith. He doesn't need to test for it.
Plus, why is she arguing with him? If she thinks that he is, the all-knowing, all-powerful, correct God, why would she argue with him? Like, you told me no, but I think I'm gonna, kind of argue and be witty to you to see if you'll still give me what I want.
She doesn't know that he's the all-knowing, all-powerful God.
And why did she ask to be
Well,
healed?
she says
She
yes,
says
she says yes, Lord.
Theology came later.
Yeah. She says yes, Lord, but she's also, she's seen him do miracles or heard him do other miracles, and I don't know that Lord is necessarily divine reference. If it is, then that's.
Capital L, that's.
Oh, hold on, the entire,
But
in the original text, the entire New Testament is in capitals. They're like
Are there other
capitals.
people referred to as Lord?
It just means like master, or it doesn't imply divinity at all.
Okay, in the Old Testament, it always was.
Huh?
Well, even if she
It's
didn't
not
know
It can't.
that he was Lord, it's not like, there are cases where it describes him going and healing lots of people, but you don't hear about him quizzing them first and testing their faith.
I guess I don't feel like it's a quizzing. I feel like it was, like I said, the scenario was he walks into a house, he doesn't want it to be known. The woman comes up and says, hey, my daughter is this and that. And he says, let them eat first, even though this is, she references, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs, meaning like even those, there's going to be plenty of food for that to happen. And for that statement, he says, it's already done. Don't worry about it. Let's go get on with our way. I've already cleansed the spirit, right? It's already left.
But then what's the children
It wasn't-
dogs distinction for? It's not like he's saying, well, we'll get to it later, so much as other people are ahead of you because of their membership in a particular social group.
Yeah, it could be metaphorical. Yeah, throw it to the dogs.
Well, why
Obviously it's a metaphor, it's not really.
Why would they-
It doesn't actually
Throwing out
think she's a
these-
cancer.
Why would the author and at least one other gospel writer, why would they put this in for a man that they were revering? Like, this doesn't seem like it's really.
Sure,
Well,
that's
that's
easy.
what-
Because
Because
back
they were
then, being
racist
racist
too.
wasn't seen as a
I
bad
mean,
thing.
No. But the thing is, though, that in another account of this, Jesus says, greater faith than, basically, your faith is greater than anyone in Israel's that I've seen. This would be a slam on his own people, right? Like that this dog, right, has greater faith than any of his people,
Well,
any
he
of the
doesn't say that.
Jews. Well, no, in one of the other gospel writers he does. What I'm saying.
I always thought that was different. I thought that was the Samaritan woman going to the well, that he said that to try to. The one that she had like
In
5
John
husbands
4,
and she didn't,
right.
she was living with a man she wasn't married to. I think that was a completely different story you're referring to.
I think that I think he might do it, and this is, I mean, I have to look it up, but, man, I know that story, but, yeah.
Well, but in answer to your question, why would they make him out to be just for a particular group? Well, it's because that's the way he was understood in early Christianity. They thought of him, they didn't think of themselves as starting a new religion called Christianity. They said, this is Judaism. He's a Jew. He's a Jewish teacher. He's a Jewish healer. So he's here for the Jews.
Until Paul invented Christianity.
Yeah, well, yeah, it wasn't until much later when, you know, what later became known as the Christians, so they couldn't convert most of the Jews, that they started reaching out to the Gentiles. But Jesus even says at one point, it says that he said, don't preach among the Gentiles, because he was here for the Jews. Why would he say don't preach among the Gentiles?
Yeah, I mean,
He was a Jewish teacher and he
again,
was a Jewish Savior.
yeah, and we're in somewhat agreement, although I have some serious nuances, obviously. But I mean, he certainly in Mark 5 he heals the demoniac who's in the region of the Gentiles. There's no real test of faith there. I mean,
Real quickly, was that in front of an audience? When he heals the Gentile? Was that in front of
the
a lot of
demoniac or
people? Yes. No, the healing the demoniac, was that in front of a large group of people? Or was it alone?
I mean, there's certainly, yeah, like you said, there was a large group of pigs there.
Because if it was in front of a large group of people, I would hazard to say that this was strictly a political strategy.
I don't understand.
Okay, if you do something nice for a group of people that you don't necessarily agree with, you can win them over.
Yeah, but
you can
then
still
he
be
kills
completely blind.
1,000 of their pigs. It's like he wipes out their economy. He's not trying to win
Okay, so
them
he's
over.
not the best politician.
What are those pigs doing in the Jewish area?
Because that's why I said that it's in a Gentile region. Right? This is evidence that it's in a Gentile region that he's doing it. Is that there are pigs there, right? I mean,
Well, that location is in 2 different places in a couple of different Gospels, but including that it's like 30 miles from the sea. So when it says the pigs ran and threw themselves in the sea, they're doing a marathon. You know? That's really hard. I would have liked to have seen the last pig, like
Suicidal
ran 30 miles.
That was some thin bacon by the time we got there.
But in any case, I mean, there are other places where it seems that he's, making it very clear. He's not there for everyone. He doesn't even want most people to know who he is. Like when he heals the demoniac, it's all over Mark. He says, keep it quiet. Don't, He's telling other people, don't tell people who I am. Things like that.
Well, I think this particular story about the woman asking for him to heal her daughter could be seen as like she has heard about Jesus, and she's not necessarily a believer, but she comes to him in hopes that he will prove the rumors true, and then he has to test her faith. And I don't think that excuses the dog analogy. I'm just saying that could be why he said that.
Well, it doesn't say that he's testing the faith. It
Oh,
says
no,
that he doesn't want
well,
people to
I'm saying
think
it could
she's
be
not in the right group.
Whether or not
I mean, that's what it says.
Right. I mean, whether or not the heading is part of the text or not, which does mention the faith in the heading.
I want to say something because I think we've just said a few things, and I want to make sure that none of it comes back to haunt us later. I'm sticking with that 7:3 has anti-Jewish racial overtones with the washing of hands, which then follows up by the subset of the Pharisees and the grandma over the cliff statement. But we've also now a couple paragraphs later here in 7:24 are saying that there's pro-Jewish or anti-Gentile racism was some of the comments that were being made. So I want to make sure that So someone's got to come back later and realize that it can't be both of those things. So I think I would say, if I had to choose between the earlier passage being, and first, the author is likely a Gentile. It's likely non-Jewish. So it's going to be unlikely that he's going to be expressing pro-Jewish, nationalist, or racist tendencies in this passage. So I would, other people made good points, but I'm going to say that however you read the dog comment, and it's a difficult statement to read, but I think I would subordinate that to the washing of hands stereotype, and that this is more anti-Jewish than pro-Jewish, and to the extent that they're racist over.
Well, I don't know why would being anti-Pharisee necessarily be anti-Jewish?
Well, it says
Because there were other groups of Jews.
Well, it says it starts off by saying for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, and then it's sort of I get a sense as it goes into Grandma Over the Cliff that it is narrowing toward the Pharisees, but it definitely throws all of the Jews under the washing
There are
of hands.
many passages where Jesus specifically says he is disagreeing with Moses, with the laws of Moses, right? I mean, there's a number of them. He says, look, Moses.
Oh, yeah. Like the time he's picking up sticks on the Sabbath day.
He's disagreeing with their interpretation of the law.
So he says, Moses, like for example, Mark 4 about divorce. He says, Moses told you could get divorced because of the hardness of your hearts, but I tell you, that which God has joined together, let man put asunder. That's what he says.
That's not what he's saying. What he's saying
That's
is,
what he said.
he says, you have heard it said
Yeah.
from the Pharisees that this is what this means.
No. He says, Moses said you could get divorced because of the hardness of your hearts. But I tell you, he's talking to the Pharisees because they're coming up the Testament. Right? And then he says, or maybe it was Mark 10. I thought it was Mark 4. But anyway, he says, there's numerous passages.
He says, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses suffered you right to bill divorcement, put her away. And Jesus said unto them, for the hardness of your heart he wrote you this precept. Therefore God has joined together.
So he didn't say Moses said. He asked, what did Moses
Well,
command
he
you?
said that's why Moses wrote it.
Right. But the thing is that
There's numerous passages where he
No. So-
Moses said this, I say this.
there really aren't
Moses
any
said you can
passages
only-
like that.
you have
There's
to,
not one.
absorb-
Like, you'd have to actually
absorb
show me
culture.
one.
Oh,
This
this
isn't
is
one.
Oh, tons of them, yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about Sermon on the Mount, at no point does he say.
What about kosher rules? He said, it's not what goes in your mouth that makes you unclean, it's what comes out.
But I mean, even in this passage, he says, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce to send her away. And the point of that was that, I mean, a divorced woman.
But what does he say about himself? He says he disagrees with that, right?
No, he doesn't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, he says you can't get divorced. And if you remarry, that's adultery. Because you can't get divorced. If you can't get divorced, if you remarry, that's adultery. That's what he said. Look, keep reading.
Well, I would, but every time I try to read, you just interrupt me.
Okay,
So I'll
let's-
let
Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. For they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman commits adultery.
There you go. That's
Matthew.
Yeah.
saying that he disagrees with Moses
that's-
right there.
That is Matthew chapter 19,
That's
verses
Matthew. He
4
does
through
a similar
9.
thing in Mark.
Except he doesn't have the qualification clause in Mark.
But it's written in a bit of reverse in Mark, because it actually says it's lawful for a man to divorce his wife. And he said, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. And then Jesus said, because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote that commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's.
But he still says he disagrees with that. He says, but
He's
I
saying,
say,
I mean,
Yeah, no,
Your hearts were hard then, and that's why this rule had to be in place, but I'm telling you now, it never was exactly,
Exactly.
it didn't have to be that
So
way.
Yeah.
Moses did it one way because you were one way.
He didn't
Now
say
I tell you
Moses was
something
wrong,
else.
he was saying, because
I'm
the
not
heart
saying
is your
Moses
heart,
was
that's
wrong.
why
He
that
says
exists.
He disagrees with Moses. Don't do it like Moses said anymore.
He's saying
Yeah.
Moses is old news, I'm your prophet now.
Yep.
Listen.
Well, hold
to what
on, you're
I'm
both saying the same thing, you're just trying to put a negative spin on it, you're
Correct,
trying to
but
put a
I think
positive
that
spin on it.
matters, it's not Jesus directly saying Moses was wrong or anything like that,
He
it's,
says, don't do it that way anymore.
Because
He
it's
is
no
changing-
longer
what he
like
said.
viable. I
He
think
is
it was
changing the
appropriate at
rules,
the
but
time.
Jesus is trying to justify Moses' position
he's saying
while also changing it.
there's a new covenant coming, and under that covenant is the same as the old covenant, but because of the hardness of you guys' heart, that old law existed.
Oh,
And
this,
so I don't
this
think it
also,
negates that, it's just.
this also reflects the changing socioeconomic status of a lot of different people around the time. Because one of the very important things that you explained, and I thought it was very well done, is that this doesn't take place in a vacuum. This takes place in a continually evolving social and political climate. So Jesus comes, has the New Testament. This is supposed to be a signal to people to change. This is something that was needed, which is probably why it gained a large following.
I want to make sure Trey gets a chance to complete his comment if you,
I'm good.
you're good? Okay.
I mean, we're coming close to time, so, you're the next.
Yeah,
next topic, right?
so on November 13th is going to be demon possession is going to be our next topic. I'm very excited about that. I've been working on that one for a while, and I'm really looking forward to it, so I hope to
For
see you all
Halloween.
then.
That's actually
Sam Raimi.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for the discussion. I think it was some good, respectful discussion happened. I think
Thanks for having us, John.
always.